nothing out.
Okay.
Let's do your coat and replace it with a bed.
Have you guys ever work on something and after you found out what the problem actually was or what you needed to do to solve the problem, you found out that you were overthinking it?
Yes.
And you made it harder than it needed to be?
Yes.
You did that? You got an example?
Quite often.
Huh?
Quite often.
The spinal you gave me for transmission.
Yeah.
Well, that's,
That was, but you made it harder than it needed to be. You overthought it, didn't you? Dustin, you ever overthink anything? You ever overthink it and make it harder on yourself than it would need to
he
be?
doesn't.
I mean, this is not what somebody's trying to.
Think it.
Huh?
I always overthink it.
Yeah. Always overthinking it.
Underthink.
Yeah. Well, anyway, what we got here, if somebody's given up on a diagnosis, and I don't know if you, every now and then I'll get one that somebody has, you know, we get a few in here that somebody just give up on. You know, write your notes now. You can turn this stuff in, put your name on it. But what I was going to say was, whenever somebody has give up on it, it's a good idea to gather. In other words, if somebody comes to you and they says, we've already looked at the fuel pump and we've already looked at this, that, and the other, and the spark plugs and all that, and we know that's not what it is. Well, it's in a lot of cases, if you're the person that's responsible for getting it straightened out, you better go back and relook at all the stuff they looked at, because if you don't, you're liable to find out that something they told you they looked at was what was wrong with it, and you can cost yourself extra work that way too. You got to come to your own conclusions, and it's not an insult to them to do that, because if they're wanting you to help them straighten it out. But some people are looking for a silver bullet. Some of the people that I used to work with, these guys that would come from, you know, somewhere like, you know,
They're mine.
these are yours?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I wondered about that. Here you go. There you go. Oh, there you go. That's it. He messed up his father. All right. Some of them hope for a silver bullet. They don't want to take the trouble to find out what's wrong. They just want to be done with the job so they can move on. And I used to get people that would ask me that all the time. Now, when we take on any troubleshooting task, we have to gather all the information that we can before we attempt a repair. Now, a lot of the times, like I've talked about this before, somebody will go over here and they'll have some job they got to do that's a clearly defined job, replace so-and-so, alternator, whatever, and they'll go in there and they'll just start digging, and they'll start taking stuff loose, and then they'll start taking stuff loose, and they go find out they wouldn't have had to do near as much work if they'd have followed what the book said. Now, occasionally the book will tell you to do stuff you don't have to do, and I'm all about that, but you got to make wise choices. I usually will read through a procedure before I ever start, or if I'm working on an unfamiliar system, I'm going to go to description and operation, and I'm going to find out how this works before I ever go just diving in there, jerking wires out and trying to fix it, you know. All right, so some people can drive and listen to a vehicle or take a brief look at codes and pins and tell you exactly what's wrong with it. Nobody has all the answers. I don't care who they are. There was this one guy that was a machinist that had worked at the Cadillac store since back in the 40s, and when I was in the 70s, when I was working at that gas station, every now and then we would have one that would be giving us a fit, and we would call Cliff. And one time we called Cliff because we had this 68 Chevelle or something that was, the muffler was get so hot it would smoke the carpet on the inside of the car. It was a weird problem, you know what I mean? The car didn't seem to be running that bad and all that, and it sounded peculiar when you think about it, because you don't see that a lot. But somebody picks up the phone and calls Cliff and said, we got this thing getting so hot it's smoking the carpet on the inside of the car. And he says, one of two things, either your ignition timing's late or you got a vacuum leak. And we said, well, we know the ignition timing's right, but we looked and found out that was a big vacuum leak there. Stopped it up, cooled right down. I mean, this guy, you could talk to him on the phone. A lot of times he would tell you what exactly it was, but not everybody has that ability to do that. Well, test drives and codes are necessary, but sooner or later, you have to leave the driver's seat and stand in front of the car and put your hands on some grease and steel, okay, to figure out what's going on. Now, I remember a 92 Chevy C10 350 with TBI. I'd been at several shops for a low power concern. Nobody'd been able to figure it out. And so they brought it over here. We went to the trouble to install, let's see, a fancy little fuel pressure adapter. Put the fuel pressure adapter on there. Now, that's a different one than the one that we have, but I thought that was really cool, so I put a picture of it up there. We put a T in. We found 2 pounds of fuel pressure instead of the 12 to 14 that was supposed to be there. And that fix turned out to be pretty simple. So it doesn't take a lot of fuel pressure for the old GM TBI. Now your Ford TBI stuff, it had to have 40 pounds a lot of the time, you know, so be aware of that. And so here we go. We remember a man in his van I told you about. He spent some more than $700 at a bunch of different independent shops. Then everywhere he went, they charged him more money and put more parts on it. And the Ford service department where I worked actually did that. Oh my goodness, okay. I'll have to call him back. All right, brought his van to the service department. He says, this is the last resort. He said, I don't have an ability to do anything except bring it here because everybody else has already, you know, charged me all this money and all that. So I went in there and I found this wire harness scratching on a bracket behind the engine, and the bill was only $20. I just walked out there. He had a work order on it. I walked out there, pulled the doghouse off, found that, fixed it, sent him on his way. And the reason I only hit him for $20, and they let me, you know, set the labor prices and that, was because I wanted to teach him that in a lot of cases, the shop with the best training is the one you need to go to first. You know what I mean? Because these other people were just guessing at it. They were pulling codes and throwing parts when they had a wire harness problem. Well, troubleshooting is 90% of a successful repair in most cases. Goes without saying, a surgical repair makes a lot more sense than replacing everything that might be causing a problem. Because some people will say, I'm going to change this, and this, but some problems can have peculiar causes. No matter how much we learn, like I said earlier, nobody has all the answers. I'm thinking about the Ranger that's running too cold right now as I say that, you know. Now, keep your knowledge to yourself doesn't make you more smarter. I have worked with places where some people, you know, wanted to be indispensable. They wanted to be the person nobody could get by without, and so they wouldn't share anything with anybody. You know what I mean? They would just keep their knowledge to themselves. But a lot of times you find out the knowledge is passing you by. And one of the things I found out early on is the more you explain stuff to everybody else, the smarter you get. You know, because you actually have to explain it to people, and things come clear to you that you never even recognized before when you're having to pull it in and take it out. You know, so whenever somebody would walk up there just cold turkey and ask me, you know, why do we need a catalytic converter and how does it work? When I was working at the dealership, I'd say, come over here and let me draw something for you, and I'd draw it out. Every time I explained it, I understood it a little better myself. You know, and of course, if I didn't know, I'd say, I'm not sure, but let's look this up. You know, I try to find it out like that. Now, you know, you don't want to say, I don't know. If you need to learn to get to where you can access that data, because if you can't access the data when somebody asks a question, you're not going to be able to access it when you're working on something. All right, that's a soft skills insert. Well, Jimmy's the guy I trained that told me about a transmission situation he encountered on a 2001 Power Stroke. Had a 4R100 transmission in it. There's a picture of one. And it was flashing the overdrive light and going into transmission limp-in mode. And a local transmission shop had rebuilt it for this, but hadn't had any luck straightening it out. It was still doing it. In other words, they pulled the transmission, they put all the clutches and seals in it and whatnot, and they put it all back together, and it was still doing the same thing. So they worked on it for a couple of weeks and just ran out of ideas. This is one where it comes to you. So if the PCM gets some strange signals that are out of the expected range, it will engage these emergency protocols. That's what I was talking to you about earlier. That doesn't mean the PCM is bad. It means the PCM is making a decision to try to save the transmission because it doesn't know what's going on. All right, write that down. That's what limp-in mode is all about. If the emergency protocols match the severity of the detected fault. Now, on this one here, the worse the problem is, the more it does to try to save things. Okay, it can be as simple as a simple mill light, or it can do other things. If it shuts down all the control solenoids, or let's say that what's going to happen if you cut the red wire that feeds all of the control solenoids so that they don't have any power, what's it going to do? Anybody know? Yeah, it's going to default to one gear that where you can drive it a decent speed and take off, and the pressure is going to default high. So you're going to have really high line pressure, and you're basically going to default usually to one gear if you lose power to that. Or if the computer decides, I'm not going to send anything to any solenoid, and I'm basically going to let them just use this one gear. It's basically, the PCM is doing the same thing as if you cut the wire going over there, if it really needs to. And the reason it does that, and I'm going to show you right here, when it goes into limp-in mode, it raises the pressure, and that makes a harsh shift. Bam! You know? Sometimes it may just raise the pressure and keep letting it shift. And if it
did that.
Yeah, and so what it'll do is it'll hammer you whenever you're shifting. You're thinking, man, that's going to tear something up, and all. And I was driving an old Chrysler one time, that's '67 Chrysler. That there's a spring that was supposed to pull this piece of linkage forward so that it could follow the throttle whenever you were giving it gas for to raise the line pressure, you know, the TV pressure, so that it would hold the gears longer. But that thing was laying back and there was no spring pulling it forward, and it banged every time you put it, you know, it would shift. It didn't really hurt anything, it just made sure that it applied the clutches real solid so they didn't burn out. All right, because their little clutches ain't got but a tiny little bit of lining on them, and if you have a soft shift when you need a hard shift, it's going to burn them out real fast. And they know that. Now the PCM compares engine speed, turbine shaft speeds, and output shaft speeds as each gear is engaged, so it knows when things aren't like level. Now what's the turbine shaft? What does the turbine shaft connect to? Where's the turbine? And where, you said the turbine. Where's the turbine? Huh? Where is it? What did he say? In the converter. So the turbine shaft is actually the input shaft going into the transmission that provides power for the vehicle to go. Now as the oil is thrown against the turbine and it starts to turn, it's going to spin the parts inside the transmission, and there's clutches that are applied that engage and hold different parts of the planetary gear set, then you're going to wind up going places, right? Okay, it knows when things aren't the way they ought to be though, because it's looking at the turbine shaft speed. It wants to be better safe than sorry, so if it doesn't know, I've actually seen some of the older vans when they had 2-digit code to throw a code 62 because it had a little bit of torque converter clutch slippage. But all it knew was that it knew the engine speed and it knew what the output speed was on those, and it said, well, I know how fast it ought to be turning, and I know the converter's locked up and it should have a straight lockup, so it'd throw a 62 code and you'd have a flashing overdrive light and all that. So what's it looking for? Well, imagine yourself operating a vehicle you drive every day. You're looking at the instrument cluster, you're looking at the speedometer, and your transmission shifts the first time, the second time, then when it shifts into third, you say, wait a minute, this tachometer is revving up too fast for third gear. You know what I'm saying? You're watching the vehicle speed, so you're doing sort of the same thing that the computers do. Just looking at that, it's registered an engine speed higher than it ought to be, and the vehicle speed in that gear. If you get this thing, you know, usually most of the transmissions now, they got all different kinds of gears and everything now, but the old standard when we had lockup converters was first, second, third, it goes into lockup, stays in lockup, goes into fourth. If you crowd the throttle a little bit and it starts picking up speed, you know that your torque converter is slipping.
So new ones don't go into lockup until overdrive.
Yeah, well, how do you know?
Well, that's what your computer said. On my end, his.
Yeah, whenever, when you watch it driving it, no. Well, that's good. See, when you know what it's supposed to do, you know when there's a problem. That's the whole thing. And it's different on every car. On a lot of them, what we used to do when we didn't have a scan tool that give us PIDs, we would tap the brake and see if the tach would jump up and then drop back down, because if you tap the brake, a lot of times it drops out the converter clutch. But on all of them, it didn't do that, and it stopped, got to where you couldn't count on that anymore. And also, you've got modulated compressor clutch lockup and all that too. Well, you're doing the same thing the PCM does, only the PCM has got a tighter tolerance than you do. It's actually watching a lot closer, and it's watching the speed, and it's like a higher resolution. Have any of you guys ever looked at the mass airflow on something and seen that it was giving you pounds per second and you wanted grams? In other words, pounds per second is such a coarse number, you can't tell what's going on. So you have to actually set it so it's giving you grams per second. Well, the computer's looking at a really high resolution comparison of the input shaft and the output shaft, and some of them got an intermediate shaft. This is just input and output. Well, once again, if a gear is slipping, the worst thing you can do is leave the pressure low. Higher fluid pressure squeezes these fibers and steels a lot harder, makes them less likely to slip. So the PCM is programmed to reduce current to the EPC, and the pressure rises. When current goes down, pressure goes up. That's if you cut the, I always remember that by saying if you cut the wire when there's no current, the pressure is at its max, right? So slippage might happen as a result of a fluid pressure leak either though. So if it's got a porous casting, it's got something wrong with the valve body, then you can actually have clutch slipping because of that too. Like if it, even raising the pressure all the way up doesn't help because something else is wrong. Clearing the diagnostic trouble code that's been stored will return the pressure to normal until the code is stored again, and then it goes back like that. So anyway, Jimmy spoke with the transmission tech that built the unit at the other shop. And the guy said, generally applying the throttle and gear on an incline would bring the problem on. If you apply it in gear on an incline, it'll start giving us trouble. So the guy had learned that because he'd been trying for 2 weeks to figure out what the heck was going on, so he knew exactly how to make it happen. That's information that you need, right? Okay. Duplicate the concern, gathering data. He duplicated the concern. He got a PO 720 for a loss of the output shaft speed sensor. A trip through the data stream was revealing the vehicle speed sensor was reading 127 miles an hour. The output shaft speed sensor was reading 6,000 RPM because it reads RPM. Okay? Now with the vehicle sitting motionless in the service bay. He's sitting in the service bay and it's reading 127 miles an hour. That's crazy, isn't it? Now this is something he's got to figure out. He doesn't have anybody to call. He doesn't have anybody he can go to. He doesn't have anybody that can actually come along beside him and say, hey, why don't you look here? Maybe this is what the problem is. He's the go-to guy. He's the end of the line. He's the guy that was the last resort. He's the guy that was, we hope he can fix it because if he can't fix it, nobody can. Right? It's one of these kind of deals. All right, so removing the output shaft speed sensor, he got a borescope and he inspected the tone wheel to see if there's anything wrong, and there was not. You can see where the output shaft speed sensor is there and the input speed sensor. Pulled it out. That tone wheel is out in the sunlight, but you could, it was still in there, and he looked through that hole. He didn't see anything wrong with that. All right, so these hurricane speeds reported on the OSS data stream had to be the result of electrical interference. So you know what he did? He disconnected the alternator, and it took care of the problem. All right. So, what you gonna do? You've disconnected the alternator. It doesn't have that problem anymore. PIDs are smooth.
Would it be, would it be a bad alternator?
Nope.
The wires.
He knew right to start with it wasn't a bad alternator. He also knew exactly what he needed to do to fix it.
The wire one's problem?
Nope.
Really should, right?
Hold on. I gotta think about it. So,
This was the problem the truck had when it first showed up at the transmission shop before it was ever worked on. Same problem.
Probably wasn't grounded.
yeah, it's gotta be a wiring issue.
All right. He tapped the battery terminals. 3 of the 4 battery terminals on that diesel truck were loose, dancing around on their posts. They looked tight, but he said you could touch them. There were little sparks jumping around in there, and that causes all kinds of spikes and ripples to go through the electrical system, and the PCM would go, they would start doing all this crazy stuff. And so all he did is tighten the terminals, and the labor charge was 1 hour. It took him about an hour to find, to go through all of this information to find it. Tightens it up, puts it out on the yard, the guy drives away happy. Now, I don't know if he was happy that he had the transmission rebuilt and might not have needed it. I don't know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Okay, now, get ready to answer your questions. Get your sheet, start answering you some questions. What the heck is this? You gotta do better than that. What purpose does it serve?
I understand. I don't get what you're asking.
What purpose does it serve? Just, you got to write down. I put you multiple choices down there. You just got to go out beside of them and make a little short answer.
I don't understand.
This is a hard one.
I say it louder.
Where would you find those, and what are they there for? That's what I want to know.
Those are all right, hold on. You got a strings that
Those?
Need to turn it off so you can see better.
Is this in the transmission?
Nope.
It's in the rear end.
Yep.
Yeah.
What purpose do they serve?
It's limited slip.
Say it up. Yeah, limited slip. Listen to that guy. He looked at it long enough till he figured it out. The outstanding performance. If everybody writes limited slip on there, you'll get that question right. Okay, what is this measurement called? The measurement you're seeing there. That's the cross section of a couple of gears. What's that measurement called?
That's gonna make me angry.
As a matter of fact, if there's worksheets on it where you're at that I put out where you're supposed to measure it.
Can't you measure it by putting that glue stuff on it to make it show a different color?
Not really. Huh?
Backlash.
Yeah.
What did he say? Who said that?
I did.
Outstanding performance. He knew what that was. All right. What does this illustrate?
Why is there showering parts there?
That's a chunk. Ring gear, pinion ring gear, rear end.
Wait, what do you want to know?
Do you see what's in parentheses up there?
3 numbers.
He's turning.
Yeah, he's turning.
Well,
He said you're turning. How do you know you're turning?
Because one
One's
axle's
faster.
going faster.
One's going faster than the other, that's right. What kind of gear set is this? It's one word.
Pinion green.
No, 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 no. I said one word, not two words. What kind of gear set? I'm talking about the collective name for this type of gear set.
Worm.
No, not worm. I've drawn this on the board before and we've talked about it.
Synchro mesh. I don't know.
What?
Are you just making this stuff up?
Synchro? Seriously? Starts with an H.
Helical, yeah.
Ends with a D.
Oh. Ed?
Oh, no, dude.
Middle letter is a P. Can anybody say hypoid?
Yeah, hypoid.
Hypoid gears. And that's because this gear is going in below, if it's going in below or above the center line, it's
I haven't
hypoid.
spelled that right, but it's close enough.
What happens if you don't use limited slip additive, friction modifier, and a limited slip differential? Don't expect to see choices here, you're supposed to know.
It'll make a bunch of noise.
No, it won't make noise.
The one we had did.
It chatters.
Yeah.
When you're turning, you'll feel it going hit when you're going around a curve. All right, identify all these parts.
Oh, you got your cap, bearing caps, you got, pinion
Just kidding.
seal.
Find the pinion bearing shim. That's too many parts to identify.
And your bearing shim, it would be, looks like, where's that? I don't
Pinion
remember.
bearing shim is what letter? One letter is all you gotta put.
D.
Huh?
I'd say M or S, I think it's S. Or,
Shit, no,
or
it's,
I or O.
The element of P.
Where's the pinion? Which item is the pinion?
No, we're looking at D.
You're looking
is
at
what-
D. D is the pinion bearing
Yeah.
shim. I said shim, but there's
Said
actually
D,
two
then you
shims.
changed your mind.
Usually there's only one shim in there. This is a guessing game with it. Okay, which is the pinion gear?
Pinion gear?
Hey.
Neither, that's spider gear.
Pardon me?
Are them spider gears?
Well, yeah, but one of them is a pinion gear and one of them is a side gear.
Oh, then A. A.
Hey.
No.
What?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
You said-
B go, because A is going in the axle.
A is going to the axle, it's a side gear, so B's the pinion gear.
yeah, dude.
All right, which of these is a differential ratio?
3.331.
Has to be, doesn't it? What's the other one?
Looks like a trend, yeah. Looks like a.
What kind of ratio is the other one?
Is that 30? No,
What kind of ratio is the other one?
Overdrive.
Overdrive. Good answer. All right, which one of these would give the best fuel economy?
275 and 1.
Four, or no,
4-1.
2,
Oh, yeah,
7, 5,
no.
and 1.
4-1.
Huh?
4 rotations and 1
2, 7.
rotation of the tires. I mean, 1 rotation.
2, 7, 5, and 1.
No, your one rotation of the tires is what you got on the, this is the tires over here. This is
Oh,
the
okay.
drive
Well,
shaft over here.
275, yeah.
Huh?
275.
275, that's right.
What was?
All right. What's happening in this illustration?
Springs.
Why
It's,
No.
that looks like a heavy duty truck. Down, that's one of them heavy duty trucks.
No, this is just a regular duty truck, but something's happening in that picture.
It's in the air.
Hmm?
It's in the air.
No, it's not in the air.
Is it?
Front end is in that, or the front is lower than the.
Something really important and dynamic is happening right here.
It's upside down.
No.
Alright, hold on, let's, I
Huh?
mean, I really don't understand.
I wish I could see the whole vehicle.
It, under power?
Yeah, it's actually, they're digging out. They're burning the tires, taking off, pulling off really hard. Because what happens there is the whole rear axle tries to turn that way. And the spring has to absorb that. Got it? Everybody understand that?
Go back.
That's why on your Camaros, you know, they got that big long
Well, I got,
thing
don't
going.
they like 550s and stuff like that, got funky looking leaf springs on it?
Well, no, this leaf frame right here doesn't look like that unless you're accelerating really hard. You know, so.
I can't even remember. What was the question number 8?
So the question for number 8,
I think that was.
which of these is a differential ratio? All right. All right. Everybody like that?